control the vertigo.
Welcome to Anthologic, the TV anthology podcast. I am your host, Mark. Anthologic is a podcast dedicated to exploring the good, the bad, and the odd of horror, science fiction, and the best of mystery suspense anthology shows and series on TV. Join me as we slip through the cracks of reality to approach the extremes of experience, where we can peruse the stories and art of a sinister fairground of strange and wonderful rides. And now we go on to the show that is the focus of this particular episode. Welcome to this episode of Anthologic with host Mark. Today we are talking about Night Gallery. This is Season 2, Episode 15. It has 3 segments, all reasonably long. There's no real short ones here. So it's kind of a bit unusual, because usually it's either 2 long segments or 4, but 2 of them are very short. But this was swapped up a little. Right, so this one first aired on January the 5th, 1972. First one of 1972. It comprises of 3 segments, as I said, for this episode 15. The first segment is called Green Fingers. It's directed by John Badham, who went on to do a movie direction, such as he made, I think the one I always think of, and he's made several films that are notable. The one that always sticks in my mind is the 1979 version of Dracula with Frank Langella and Laurence Olivier. That was one of his. And the script was written by Rod Serling, based on a short story by R.C. Cook. Now, the short story itself only really had one person, the widow, involved, Mrs. Bowden, I think her name was. Yeah, Bowen. But that, because it was only really a first-person perspective on the widow, that had not much dramatic sort of feel to it. So Serling expanded the plot to be about a sort of fairly ruthless property developer who wants to buy the land that this woman lives on. Now, this woman lives in a small cottage surrounded by flowers, lots of flowers in the garden. She's a keen gardener, and she's kind of a bit of a dotty old maid. That's the kind of type she is. And Elsa Lanchester plays it well. Oh, I should have mentioned her. The main character is played by Elsa Lanchester, Mrs. Bowen, played by Elsa Lanchester. Most famous for, and she's got a career much broader than this, but she is most famous for playing the Bride of Frankenstein in the original 1935 movie. With the hair, that one, that's her. Married to Charles Laughton for quite a considerable time, and quite a good actress. And here she's kind of a dotty old maid who has this house. Now, a ruthless property developer, played very nicely by Cameron Mitchell, wants to buy her place because he's got this idea of a massive factory complex employing thousands of workers, but she will not sell. Various agents have tried to sell to her and she won't have it, so he decides to go see her himself, convinced she's just playing hardball and wanting a good price. And he offers to name her price, and she won't have it. All she does is talk about all her garden, and he's quite impressed with her gardens, but she won't sell. So there's quite a long conversation, and he tries to tell her what's going on, but she keeps going on about she's got green fingers. She anything she plants, she can grow. She's got the knack. So she shows her all sorts of weird and wonderful things. But he kind of starts to get annoyed and sort of saying, come on, name your price. But she won't have any of it. She will not sell. And he's furious. He describes her as a horse trading biddy or something like that. So in the end, he has to resort to something else. He hires a thug to try and intimidate the woman, and the thug says, "Well, what do you want me to do? What do you want me to do?" And he says, "I just want her out of there. That's all I want." And then the next thing is we get a call to the sheriff's department where deputies rush in. They find signs of a struggle. There's an axe lying on the kitchen floor. And they find Mrs. Bowen in a state of shock, digging in the garden with her hand obviously injured and bleeding, and in quite a state. And they get to the hospital, and she says to them, "I have green fingers. Everything I plant grows. Everything." Now, you get the impression she might have buried the thug, but it's never that clear. She's buried something, and she's got a hand injury. And it's clear that one of her fingers came off. So it's possible also she has buried one of her fingers. And that, in fact, turns out to be the case. She dies in the hospital. Saunders is kind of perturbed, and he has a chat with a sort of underling about it. Says, "Yeah, I didn't put him up to this. This isn't my fault." So he goes back to the cottage, looking around, looking through the garden. Then he hears some weird digging noise, and he can't make out what it is. And then he goes and looks, and suddenly two hands emerge from the ground, then two arms, and it's basically the figure of Mrs. Bowen as a kind of reanimated corpse with plants coming out of her and bits coming out of her. Saunders is kind of first kind of shocked by this, but I think driven insane in a sense. And she's sitting there in a rocking chair, discoloured looking, all these roots coming out of her, saying, "I have green fingers. Everything I plant grows, even me." And Saunders kind of goes mad. His hair goes white, and he kind of madly looking at the camera says, "Little acorns from little acorns, the mighty oaks grow. Do you know what grows from old ladies' fingers? Old ladies." So yeah, madness ensues. Greed brings on madness. As I say, Serling wrote this. It's a good turn, memorable turn. Good entry into this cycle. Very easy comics, extremely easy comics. It reminds me a little of the sort of stories they have in Creepshow, the first segment in Creepshow, in many respects, which I think was certainly riffing on this. So I kind of like the twist. And I mean, the budget was extremely low, so both the director and the makeup and, the art direction needed to be creative. The director, John Badham, was a little dissatisfied, but the fact is they managed to make the garden look lush, but in his own words, it looked like it was all planted yesterday instead of it growing organically. And apparently he really wanted the whole house to, not just the garden, but the house to be covered in vegetation to give that feel of it being an organic and living place, which he felt would have served the story better. But however, nevertheless, it works entirely well in the way they've done it. So it's a really, really solid episode, and one I think would stick in the mind. And probably one of those high up, if you listed the best segments, it would be high up. I like Cameron Mitchell in this. He's kind of almost kind of creepy, sleazy version of Gene Barry. He always reminds me of Gene Barry. And it's kind of pretty good. This one isn't particularly horrific, but it's unsettling. Let's put it that way. The second segment, this is called The Funeral. This is teleplay by Richard Matheson, directly based on his own short story, directed by John Meredith Lucas, and starring various people that are kind of famous in American TV. They're not particularly well known here. Well, there's one character who I think was, what show was he from? Hogan's Heroes. And essentially we have a funeral director called Morton Silkline receiving a client called Mr. Ludwig Asbach. Asbach is played by an actor called Werner Klemperer, who's from Hogan's Heroes, and the mortician Morton Silkline was played by Joe Flynn. Joe Flynn is from a show called McHale's Navy. They're both kind of comedy actors. I think, and sort of this is meant to be comic, but it's a little broad. Now, unfortunately, this segment runs for 14 minutes, and honestly, this should have been a 2-minute segment. One of those ones. The premise is kind of weak. The execution's a bit silly. It looks like amateurs trying to do a night gallery in many respects, the way it was done. So essentially, a man goes into a mortician and said, I want the most wonderful ceremony, and the mortician says, what's the name of the deceased? And he says, Asper. And he goes, and your name is? Asper. He goes, oh, a relative? And he goes, me. And the mortician's first incensed. Is this some kind of joke? This is not appropriate for this environment. He says it's a joke in Portos, but then the guy gets angry and says, no, this, and then he reveals he's a vampire. And in fact, he turns into a bat and flies off at one point. But the thing is, he has stressed money is no object. So the mortician, who's quite greedy, continues with creating, the wake and so on. Asper climbs in the coven, and then various characters turn up. One's called the Count, an older vampire. There's a witch. There's a hunchback, Igor, a hunchback. There's a werewolf, and a weird kind of Renfield-y character. That's what we're going on here. It looks like a Halloween party, and in fact, Jack Laird was the hunchback, Igor. In this, he had now apparently this was quite a lot of work for the makeup department. Not surprisingly, doesn't look great, but it looks okay. I think the delivery of the Count gives this sort of oration, and it's okay. But things kick off, and it sort of descends into a bit of farce. In fact, the witch starts throwing around. Jenny, I think she's English or meant to be English, but she's called Jenny from Boston. She's a New England witch, I guess, and she's in full Halloween witch makeup. It's that kind of big nose, big crooked nose, all that kind of business. She starts throwing fireballs around, which causes it to become farcical. However, Silkline does get a package from Asper, which creates a massive amount of money, so he's kind of not too bothered. But then something else, this weird red-eyed, I know it's ghostly. What I think the suggestion is it's an alien appears and sort of says, you've been recommended by a friend and cost is no importance. Silkline looks at the money on his desk and opens his books and said, no problem. Okay. This should have been a couple of minutes tops, really. It's a punchline. It's a Charles Adams joke, really. And it doesn't really come off. It's not that funny. It's not really much to it. I would not rate this segment at all. Which is a shame because I think the two either side of it are actually pretty good. Now, the third one I'm going to talk about is called The Tuning Dance Cafe. Plot-wise, is quite weak. There's really not much to it. But the execution's quite good. The actors are good. It's well directed. There's a lot of creativity got into it. It was directed by a guy called David Rawlins, who had ambitions to direct more and wanted to be more in the night gallery, and he was a writer. But apparently they got fed up with him and sort of just moved him along at this point, so he never got to direct anymore. But this one shows a lot of flair. Essentially, it's a couple who obviously got a problematic marriage. The woman in particular, called Kelly, is really uncommunicative and just clearly fed up with the whole thing. Well, the husband's trying really hard to engage her and sort of bring it out. And they stop at this diner and they put on a tune on the jukebox and a country song sings. And he says, "That's weird. I didn't choose that one," and he chooses another record, and it plays the same song, and he complains he says there's something wrong with your jukebox, but the cafe owner says nope. Over the 5 years I've had it fixed loads of times. I changed the selections, I changed the jukebox, and that's the only song that ever plays. And he's got a theory of why that is. It turns out that in the past, a man and his girlfriend, who's a striking redhead woman, called Red, Roy is the man, used to frequent the cafe, and Roy would also always play this song because he considered it their song. But the couple, Roy's a sort of petty crook, I think, and they're strange in their relationship, and he wants to do one last heist. But at one point, he kind of, Red does not put up with this anymore, and he kind of slaps her about a bit and then goes off for a heist. So, he's not the best character. And it ends up, the police chase him back to the cafe, and there's a shootout while the song is playing. Now, the way this is approached is quite good. The director has, as I say, a lot of sort of artistic flair, and he kind of films it from, for example, the jukebox perspective, and he inserts within the scenes of the unhappy married couple trying to talk kind of weird hints of something else. There's kind of other stuff going on. We see other scenes. We see broken glass. We see the records playing. And meanwhile, we're in the soundscape of the scene. So these are kind of extra scenes. It reminded me a bit of the sort of techniques used in Midnight Cowboy to elicit the past of Buck, Joe Buck, who is kind of tied up in his memories. It had that kind of feel, and I thought it was quite impressive. But as they leave, another couple pull up, and the woman is a striking redhead with a man. So they're wondering if it's Red returning. As they drive off, this couple go into the jukebox, and they're long gone into the night, our original couple. But then we hear the woman scream really loudly. And there's hints throughout, or even statements throughout the script that one day she might return. Maybe it's just kind of waiting for her. It's that kind of thing. So it would be a kind of returning ghost story which isn't very standouty as a story. However, its presentation is quite impressive. I quite like this. And apparently no one wanted to work on this. No one liked the script. They kept trying to improve it. Couldn't really do much with it. Jack Laird gave it to people that were trying to take their shot. In fact, David Rawlins was just wanting to be a director. So it's like, okay, you can run with this. So they gave him what they considered to be a rather poor script. But he did a lot with it. Interestingly, the redhead is played by Dave Rawlins' wife, Brooke Mills. But she looks the part. There's nothing wrong with that. The song, in addition, the song was written for the episode. It's called If You Leave Me Tonight, I'll Cry. And this song keeps repeating and repeating and repeating. And they were going to have it as a pop song, but the singer they brought in decided they wanted to go for a sort of country vibe. So they went for a country and western vibe. And the singer is called Jerry Wallace, who had a top 10 hit in 1959 called Primrose Lane. So 10 years later, he was brought on for this. But they wanted it. They had it more as a pop song, but they went for more of a country song. Now, interestingly, this song caught on. People started asking for the song from the Night Gallery, and quite a lot of record radio stations were sort of approached about it. So Universal got Jerry Wallace back, recorded it, put it out, and it was number one in the country and western charts for 3 weeks. And it even hit the main chart, the Billboard chart, like number 30 or something for a few weeks. So it was quite a good segment. Now, that's kind of interesting. And it was the song made quite an impression. The person that was involved in writing the song, that was part of the production, made a lot of money from this. Apparently he made 10 grand a year or something like that from royalties. It was used in Smoking the Bandit and stuff like that. So an interesting little aside for this episode, and the actual segment's pretty good. So here we have 3 segments: really good, very poor, really good. So And unfortunately, they'd have brought up something better in the middle. This could have been a classic episode in many respects. So, yeah, good one, though. Good one. The funeral is a drag and goes on way too long. It's as long as any of the other segments, and it's just silly and not very good. But the ones either side, in particular Green Fingers, I think is the standout, are rather good ones. So, I think I'll wind this up there. So, Night Gallery, episode 15, first aired on the 5th of January 1972, first one of 1972. Overall good, middle section poor. I'll wind it up there. But before I go, may I ask, is anybody out there?
I'm not.
We now return control of your television set to you until next week at this same time, when the control voice will take you to